Let's move on to the next presentation. Melanie is going to be giving us a talk. Melanie, forgive me, Melanie, I don't know how to pronounce your last name. Is it Matteliano? I actually don't know.
Matteliano, pretty close.
Matteliano. Okay. Her talk is titled "I Understand My Place Here: Relationships of Care and Experiences of Connection Within an Agricultural Community." So go ahead, Melanie, and
can I screen share?
Absolutely. Can you, Max, give her the screen share option?
Oh, now I see my own face giant. That's terrible. Where'd everybody else go? Oh, there you guys are. Okay. All right.
You'll be able to screen share now, Melanie.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Let me just put my little timer on so I can see the time here. Okay, so Michael already shared the title of my talk. I'm going to take you guys back in time a little bit to some research that I conducted before the pandemic in another world, another era. And I also apologize for not really addressing the theme, but I did want to share this research that I did for my master's work with you guys. If I can figure out how to advance the screen, that is. Okay. So this presentation focuses on the experiences of small-scale alternative agriculturalists. And I'm going to use the lens of care to explore the local analytic of connection, which the people that I worked with used to describe aspects of their agricultural lives and work. I'm going to discuss care relationships between people and land, plants, and animals in agricultural settings. And then I'll also discuss care between people in the context of a local food system. So I conducted my research in the North Fork Valley, which is located in Colorado on the western slope of the Rocky Mountains. This area is among the traditional homelands of the Ute people, but in 1881, the US military removed the Utes from the valley by force, and the Ute bands in the North Fork relocated to reservation lands in Utah, today the Uinta and Ouray Reservation. And settlers took up residence in the valley immediately following this violent removal. The valley's primary settler economic legacies are coal mining and agriculture, and the geography of this valley encourages an abundance of smaller farms, as there's not space to accommodate large monocropping operations. Instead, this region is characterized by its biodiverse agricultural production, which includes fruits, especially stone fruits, vegetables, grains, flowers, cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs. And the valley also currently contains the highest concentration of small-scale organic farms in the state. Some of the farms here have been operated by people whose families have been in the valley for several generations, or farming elsewhere for several generations. So there's some people who've been doing agriculture their whole lives. And then also this valley has been a destination for multiple waves of back to the land migration from the 60s onwards. So some North Fork farmers are people from suburban and urban areas who became farmers after engaging in other careers. Some people there describe it as hippies and cowboys are the sort of predominant groups of people in the valley right now. So I was familiar with this area prior to conducting my research. Some of you know Rachel, she's a member of the society as well, and she lives out there. So I was able to visit this place and I knew the place before I began researching, and this allowed me to develop my research questions in consultation with community members out there. I did 2 months of field work in summer 2019, and participant observation on a lavender farm, a vegetable farm, a garlic and grain farm, and a hemp farm. I interviewed 37 people, and among my interviewees, they utilize a really wide array of alternative approaches to agriculture, including organic growing methods, biodynamics, integrated pest management, holistic management, intensive rotational grazing, low-stress stockmanship, permaculture, regenerative agriculture. It's important to point out how many of these frameworks draw from indigenous knowledge and indigenous ways of, caring for land and growing food. The implications of all of these settler farmers sort of drawing from this knowledge is a whole other paper that I would love to, dig more into and discuss another time. But for this presentation, I'm going to focus more on the experiences of the agriculturalists that I spoke with. However, there's a lot of complexity to unpack there for sure, and people are cognizant of that to really varying degrees out there. Sorry, I don't know how to press the button. Okay. So just to really briefly touch on the sort of theoretical lens that I used in this presentation. So this is something that came from sort of medical anthropology, but people have also applied it to farming as well. And this is looking at care. So this is asking questions about what it means to care for, care about, or be cared for, with a focus on what these embodied relationships look like in practice. So care means an affectively charged and selective mode of attention that directs action, affection, or concern at something. I really like this lens for farming because it acknowledges that care practices are something that's often nonverbal and embodied, and also that care is relational. It's negotiated within context with the living organisms that you're caring for. It also acknowledges that care practices are really value-laden. Alternative agriculturalists in particular are really beginning to reckon with what it means to do good care and what that looks like on the ground. So there's a lot of negotiating these values in context. And then also, it's important to see that care involves physical, emotional, and intellectual labor. I think in farming, a lot of times this goes unacknowledged. People know that farming is hard work and that it's really physically taxing, but they also don't think about, the emotional stress of what it means to be accountable to plants and animal lives, around the clock. And there's also a lot of intellectual expertise that goes into farming. People have to be experts, in everything from banking and finances to mechanics to fixing machinery to soil chemistry. So there's a lot of labor that goes into this. So talking about the concept of connection, which this presentation focuses on, one of the predominant themes that people talked about in my interviews and just throughout my participant observation is the idea that they are connected through doing agriculture. People position themselves within these broader narratives where agriculturalists are connected and people who are not agriculturalists are disconnected. One farmer described it this way: 99% of Americans are disconnected from the earth. They don't gain their livelihood or their existence from their interaction with the earth. That something has to give itself for you to survive. That's a connectedness. And we're not. We're totally disconnected. We live in air-conditioned houses, air-conditioned cars, offices. We drive on concrete and pavement, and we visit Mother Earth once in a while on the weekends, and that's it. Another concept that people sort of talk about when they discuss connection is the idea that people in mainstream society don't really understand or experience directly where food comes from, or they don't appreciate where food comes from. And I've been thinking about this as sort of food alienation. A scholar named Cheney draws from Marx to describe this concept of food alienation. But this is the idea that when you aren't directly involved in creating food, you're separated from the means of how it's made, and there's a disconnection there. One of the farmers, permaculturists who I spoke with, described it this way: when we go to the store and we buy a plastic wrapped thing, it's a complete disconnect from the fact that that bag of carrots actually grew in the ground somewhere and came from dirt. So farmers position themselves as connected both because of their agricultural work and relationship to producing food. But in this presentation, I'd like to also suggest that there are some other ways that people come to experience connection through this work. And I'm trying to kind of unpack what this means for people. So I suggest that farmers experience connection through engaging in relationships of care in their daily work. So there's 4 ways that people experience connection through care that I'd like to talk about today. These are tinkering and attentive care, knowing the ground, mutual or reciprocal care, and then connection to ecological systems. So a lot of farmers explain that the way that they learn how to farm really well isn't through like book learning, or even though there is a lot of reading and study involved for a lot of people, rather it's through trying out different practices with the animals and plants that they're caring for, seeing how they respond, seeing what works, and then using these experiments to get better and better at what they do. So this concept of tinkering describes the process of attentive experimentation involved in care. To tinker means to pay attention, adjust practices, and meticulously try new things based on the needs and preferences of those you're caring for until a suitable material, emotional, and relational arrangement is achieved. This is from Mole et al., 2010. So the needs of goats and lavender plants and garlic are all really, really different. So this process of tinkering comes in when people learn how to care for the specific plants and animals that they are raising or growing. And through this process of really paying attention, people also become emotionally attached to the plants and animals that they're taking care of. One farmer described it this way: I literally am the person who touches the seed, who puts it in the ground, who puts the water on it, who weeds it, who watches it grow. And I'm so attached to that food. You don't think that you get attached to food, but trust me, you get attached to food. Like that's my 500 row of beets. I've been babying that, for months and months and months. So I want that food to go to great places. You know what I mean? Here she's talking about the time and investment that she's put into these beets. And I noticed a lot of people used kinship metaphors when they were talking about plants and animals to sort of describe this relationship and attachment that they feel. Another way that people come to experience connection is through this concept of knowing the ground. Ground is a preferred term that a lot of farmers use, I think because it emphasizes the agricultural potential of a piece of land. This is something that people explained happens over time as you're working on a piece of land or ground. Through like this embodied work, you start to really get to know not just the land, but how all the different plants and animals on that land interact, and also how the climate interacts, sort of all of these, nuanced interrelationships on that piece of ground. So one rancher described it this way. She said, well, then we didn't know anything. We knew paonia. We didn't know, and that's the thing with industrial farming. Who knows the land? Who really knows it? Who knows that the water won't run that way? Somebody that's tried to run, So you know your ups and downs, and we have a problem with seepage that runs in a certain area and you can't hay it. My point of the story is we know that property because you've fallen into the ditch, you've gotten swept away in places. We were so jealous of a neighbor and her brothers that they grew up learning and just being on the land and knowing it. And that's a big hint to how to work it when you're twiddling around with your dad. So here she's emphasizing time spent on the land, mistakes made, like falling into ditches, and just sort of that intimacy of getting to know a place over time. This type of knowledge is really unequivocally valued by agriculturalists. It can have a big impact on your ability to be good at farming and to take care of land and know what you're doing. And also, I guess one more thing I'd point out about this is that a lot of people experience this, even though people can talk at length about what they've learned, they experience it sometimes as tacit knowledge, as something that, is a little bit more, not necessarily put into words, but something you've learned through experience and through action. For example, one gardener told a story about knowing that there was going to be a freeze just by kind of feeling the wind and what that wind felt like. So it's something that becomes an embodied type of knowledge, which also leads to a feeling of connection to a place. So the next way that people come to experience connection through care is by realizing that the relationships of care that they're involved in are mutual or reciprocal and that they're not one-sided. One goat dairyman described it this way. One lesson that I really took to heart was the fact of what goats are as far as a herd animal. They have a herd mentality, they have a hierarchy, they have leaders, followers, they have roles. They keep each other safe and comfort each other as much as they do fight and challenge each other. That is very human. And it made me really feel that my primary goal is to be in this herd and to be the leader of this herd. My goats look to me for safety, they look to me for food. And what they give me is good milk, good healthy animals to be able to deal with whenever I need to do maintenance with them or milk them. We understand our roles, so they understand where I am amongst them. And even though I haven't been doing it long, I understand my place here, what I mean to them and what they mean to me, and how they're important to our life. They keep these roofs over our heads and keep hay in their feeders and such. And we need them as much as they need us. So as people are engaged in these mutual relationships of care, they really come to see that their own well-being is interdependent with the well-being of the plants and animals that they're caring for. And this creates a sense of being grounded and connected through this interdependence. Interestingly, care as a framework also acknowledges that there can be violent dimensions to care as well. And even people who raised animals who were eventually going to be slaughtered also often felt that there was an element of mutuality or reciprocity in their relationships, and that they sort of negotiated the ethics of this through interactions rather than basically that like love throughout an animal's life is a moral good that doesn't necessarily get negated by killing later on. And then the final dimension of how people experience connection through plants and animals, that caring for plants and animals, that I'd like to talk about today is through connection to ecological systems. So this is realizing one's place in the broader world. So as people come to know the individual goats or plants or trees or whatever that they're caring for, this is a series of one-to-one relationships. However, all of these different relationships aggregate into this broader sense of knowing and understanding that they're part of an ecology or a broader system. And they see the ways that that their choices through agriculture and the things that they do on the land have a really broad impact on this system. One orchardist described it this way. He said, "I've always talked about in presentations or tours, the ecosystem of the farm. And I realized one day I had a graph up with fertility and insect management and varieties and marketing and insect and pest control, and they all intersect. There's lines between each of them. And then I was like, oh, wait, I should be in there too, because my personality affects the farm. We are part of the ecosystem. And then I suddenly realized, well, my customers are too. They radically change the farm based on what they want. But that really makes a nice cycle. It's not like just buy from me to support me. It's like actually you can buy from me to alter what I do, whether it's the environmental leadership stuff or having the money to invest in photovoltaics." So here he's understanding his own role in this broader ecosystem. And a lot of farmers spoke about this as seeing that the world doesn't center around them, but rather they're part of something bigger. And this sense of being connected to something bigger can be really meaningful for people in terms of feeling that they have an impact through their choices, that they can do something good in the world through their agricultural practices, but also just seeing that, they're not separate from things. I also want to acknowledge that there are some tensions in connection. It's not all roses here. So one area of tension is around the topic of scale and mechanization. A lot of farmers that I spoke with suggested that they feel more connected when they operate on a smaller scale. And this has partly to do with the sheer number of plants and animals that are present on a farm or ranch, and also how sort of attentive you can be in those day-to-day interactions with them. However, not everyone feels this way, that smaller scale is more connected. And a lot of people really do depend on machinery to get their work done. There's a real trade-off between wear and tear on their bodies and using machinery. And people have to farm in a way that's also economically feasible. So sometimes people are put in this position where they have to kind of navigate choices about scale and mechanization that can be a little bit more complex. So one farmer described his understanding of connection and scale this way. "I think smaller, you're more connected. I've worked on some farms that are bigger, but I've never worked on any of the giant farms. Small farms that are more family owned, where there's a lot of handwork and you're just really connecting without as much machinery, I do think you connect differently. It's almost like you get a little more spiritually connected to it. I do use some machinery here, a tractor and stuff, but I don't use it a whole lot. And a lot of the work is done by hand. We take time to pick things and really care for each little piece of produce and make certain it's presented really nice and a lot of love in it. And I think mechanization sometimes on a bigger place, you can lose some of that intention that's put into it possibly. When you dig the potatoes by hand and each one is coming out of the soil and you clean it off and you planted them, it's a different connection." So here he's really drawing a point between doing things by hand and that sort of physicality and sensuality of smaller scale work and his experiences of connection, which I think brings up a lot of really interesting questions about connection and physicality and sensuality. Another person described it as smaller scale having more touch on the land as well, which I thought was interesting. So now I'd like to turn to looking at relationships of care between people in this local food system. And I particularly want to emphasize that in the context of this agricultural community, relationships of care with land, plants, and animals are co-constitutive with relationships of care between people. So I'll talk about this in 4 dimensions. Feeding people, caring through shared labor, caring through sharing knowledge, and agricultural communities of practice. So the first way that people care for each other through caring for land and plants and animals is by simply feeding other people. Farmers take a lot of joy and pleasure in knowing that they are nourishing people through their work. And this can be just feeding people more broadly, whoever is eating their food, but there's also more informal networks of trading food in this valley. A lot of people will swap, vegetables for fruit or meat for, vegetables. People are constantly sharing food with one another, and they can directly see, that people that they know personally and have relationships with are being nourished by their work. So in this way, people feel connected through kind of the impact of feeding one another. Another way that people come to care for one another through helping out with agriculture is by sharing labor. People will really commonly spend time working on other people's farms and sort of trading back and forth in terms of time. Sometimes people compensate one another, with gifts or sometimes money, but Other times it's just something that people trade back and forth. And this is a way to feel connected because you know that you're supporting your community, but there's also another dimension to it that I think is interesting. One farmer explained it this way. Not always for trade, but sometimes for cash, the number of people that you end up working for in a year is amazing. Last year, I'm sure I worked at 10 different farms, even if it was only for a day or two. And I think that's another way of closing a circle. So you're actually seeing someone in their life. You're working together on something. We help our friend with his compost business. And just to stand in a pile of steaming compost together for a few days in December, it's like that's a friendship. And then we cannot see that person for 3 months, but we still have a real connection. We know what they're doing with their life, and they know that we share some element of that. So here he's pointing to the fact that when you help someone else care for the plants and animals on their farm, you're also sort of directly experiencing those embodied activities, and you're really seeing what their life is like, what their relationships are like. And through that, you have the sense of kind of understanding a little bit more about their life and their purpose and what's meaningful to them. So this is another way that people feel connected, is through these experiences of working together, which is something as anthropologists we well know the value of participant observing and working together with people and how that can help you have deeper understanding. Next is knowledge sharing. So people in this valley really value education, and this is something that I benefited from as a student, as an anthropologist. People were really willing to welcome me onto their farms just because I was interested in learning about things. And people enact this in a lot of different ways. So this can be hosting educational events on farms. There's a lot of agritourism in this valley. So people view this as an important part of their work, of having tourists come to their farm and sort of giving them an opportunity to experience a little slice of connection and, educate them a little bit about what farming's like. There's also, seed schools, a lot of events where people can come and swap knowledge with one another. And then also people just do this informally as well. Providing information to their social contacts and sharing the knowledge that they've developed over their time farming. And creating opportunities for land-based learning is another important aspect of this, sort of facilitating other people coming onto the land and being able to try out, these activities themselves, like I mentioned with the intern programs. And then the final way that people care for one another through caring for land and plants and animals is through communities of practice. This is a group of people who share a concern, a set of problems, or a passion about a topic, who deepen their knowledge and expertise in this area by interacting on an ongoing basis. So these provide spaces of support and knowledge exchange for people from beginning to advanced. And they often center on the specific plants or animals that people are caring for, or their preferred agricultural practices or methods. So there's a biodynamic growers community, there's a lavender association, there's a Valley Organic Growers Association. There's endless groups in this valley where people can come together and around this shared passion and really learn how to do their work better. And this is a really great way for people to invest in someone else's success by really figuring out how to care for plants and animals in a way that works well. So I also want to acknowledge that there are tensions in connection between people as well in the community. Even though there's these really great circles of care between people, these circles are incomplete. Part of this is that perhaps just there's so many people in the valley that not everyone can directly participate. There is a strong emphasis on reciprocity, but some people are also left out of these interactions, and this exclusion can be based on value judgments placed on, their farming or ranching practices. If people feel that they're doing things in a way that is either different or is not living up to maybe the values that people would like to see. And then there can just, be interpersonal conflict as well in small communities too. So that can create some tensions here. And then it's also really important to acknowledge that not everyone has access to even participate in this space. Having access to land is a real privilege, and there's a lot of incompleteness in who is able to access land and participate in this way. So just to take a few moments to reflect on sort of the impact of connection through care. Just to recap, small-scale alternative agriculturalists in the North Fork Valley experience connection through participation in dense networks of care relationships between people and other living things. In the context of this local food system, social and ecological care are intertwined. And And for many of the people I worked with, these experiences of connection and care really shape their identities and the sense of purpose in their lives. They recognize that they might be able to make some sort of impact, whether it's in their local ecology, their community, or even in the world more broadly in some small way. And a lot of people relate their experiences of connection to their broader visions for creating better food systems and more hopeful social and ecological futures. There's a lot of values that people center their work on, and especially in alternative agriculture, I think that people are maybe a little more values driven than they might be in other spaces, or perhaps it's just a cultural thing that they're more willing to speak about it. But a lot of people feel that the people that I worked with feel that through caring and experiencing connection, they're trying to create some better way of doing food and feeding people that's going to be, more beneficial both ecologically and socially. Okay. I wasn't able to see the chat, so I apologize if I missed any messages. But
No problem. All right. Well, we have about 15 minutes for questions before lunch. What are your questions?
I see some discussion of seed groups in the chat. Yeah, there is a seed school out there. I could refer you to the people who are involved in that if you're interested. And there's also a master gardener who's pretty passionate about seed saving and sharing seeds. So I could definitely send you their information if you'd like. I don't know if their seed school has a particular name, but yeah, I'll put it in the chat after this for you.
I had a question. Thank you so much. This was really, really interesting. And I was sharing in the chat too, just some leads as far as other communities that are kind of doing not work. I really appreciated this care as a framework. That was really new to me and it was really exciting. And I feel like that is really helpful to like the development of food systems, the development of even like value-added products for indigenous communities. So I just put like a couple connections in there. And NCAI just did a study with the Oneida on food systems. So with the Oneida of Wisconsin. But I was really interested in, they have these seed groups that are forming up, certainly in the indigenous community, and just the etymology of that, right? Seeds as growth, in addition to this touch on the land, planting a seed to see these sort of descendancy that will happen in the world, and these like sort of generational descendancies, generational communities of care as well. And I was thinking about, I was thinking about like the communities as they expand out beyond even the local, like how these rings of influence are happening with the sort of outreach and tourism and schooling, and also exchange of information and exchange of like ideas and experiments and things that can expand through different spheres of influence. So the way that seeds get sent across the country sometimes, or now you have I'm part of an AeroGarden enthusiast group, so. But I was interested sort of in the ways that this can go outwards too, but how it actually sustains this idea of the small, same way that we're thinking of like Main Street and things, like how do you maintain that intimate culture? So I really liked the sort of ways that those apply. I don't know, it's just common.
Yeah. It's really fascinating because like a local food system isn't like this impermeable thing that's its own bubble, like there's so much interaction that takes place, outside of the valley. And I think also, economically, it's not a bubble too. Like people are sending food out. They really can be dependent, for their livelihoods on that type of exchange. I'm not super expert on how people are sharing knowledge outside of this space, but a few things that come to mind are, some of the people are involved in these associations that are like broader than just that local regional thing. So for example, I believe the Lavender Association stretches beyond outside of this valley to more like Western Colorado. Some of these ranchers, attend conferences that are like, outside. Holistic management is like a big thing sort of nationwide and beyond, globally. So people are like engaged in these sort of intellectual spaces that are beyond this place. but it is kind of like a destination location. Like the agritourism kind of comes in and then people learn stuff and then they go back to where they're from and like maybe they understand a little bit more about farming or care. But yeah, there is sort of also a geographic element too. Like it is like it's off the main highways. Like people kind of go to the North Fork if they know that this place exists. So it's interesting to think about, yeah, how could people even broaden their impact by sharing more broadly and like tell those stories. The last thing I'll say too is they've tried to get in the news a lot lately because of oil and gas development, and so I think people are really interested in sharing what they're doing for that reason as well, and that type of advocacy.
I wanted to share just one example of like that kind of when you're saying like that impact that you can have if you are like looking outward. Like seeds, I keep going back to seeds because that's like
Seeds are amazing.
Very indigenous thing, I guess. I don't know. Or Winona LaDuke has gotten to me. But seeds as a kind of language or cultural revitalization as well, because you have some of these heritage varietals, both in terms of corn for indigenous folks, certain corn varietals in certain regions, it just hadn't been grown there in so long. And so they had to redevelop it and reintroduce it to that region in a way. And so reintroducing that staple and spiritual food. And I imagine a lot of these foods that they're working on become spiritual things in terms of that connection to land. But that revitalization that's happening of culture as well in those spaces with that intergenerational, but even across communities. And I think of the seeds for the corn, and I think of apple varietals, because there are these heritage apple varietals that are just, they could even be related to like one backyard in a way. I don't know the specifics exactly of it, but like I know that there's a huge community that cropped up, or not huge, but like a very passionate community that cropped up about kind of cataloging and trying to revitalize some of these heirloom type things. So like seeds and farming as heirlooms.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. There is a lot of passion out there for heirloom varieties for sure, and for seeds. Yeah, it's an interesting question of like, native plants as well, and who's like, growing those types of varieties versus like growing other varieties too. But this is a little bit tangential, but one story I'll quickly share is one farmer is really passionate about like seeds from different places, and he has taken to growing crops specifically for like some migrant communities that are nearby that can't access those crops in other places. So he's found like these stories that come with these plants to be this way to actually connect socially and like grow something for people and then learn recipes from them and kind of have that exchange. So I think there's a lot of power in seeds for sure.
Melanie, I just wanted to first thank you for your presentation. Super interesting. And I thought I had to laugh to myself when you started by talking about alternative methods, right? Because it's like, these are the methods that were the original methods. And we've all gotten swept away in thinking that industrial farming is the real method and everything else is alternative. Somewhere floating around, somebody very astutely commented, I think it was on Facebook, that why should I have to call my carrot an organic carrot? You should have to call your carrot a chemical carrot. And I can just call mine a regular carrot, because I didn't put anything in it. So really, really important stuff you're talking about. I've been gardening in Denver for 25 years or so now. And so the tinkering bit that you talked about really resonates with me. It's, my dad taught me to, you never plant your garden until about the 10th of May in Denver, because that's the last frost date. And so a few years ago, I decided to challenge that because it's just such a long time to wait. I mean, we have 60-degree days in March, and it's like your garden's just sitting there begging for something to begin to happen. And so I started planting certain cool season crops around St. Patrick's Day and have had a lot of success. So I just bring that up to say, this tinkering, this really interacting with the earth on season in, season out, and learning its rhythms, you can't just read a book about it, right? Or you can't just, understand it. It is this relationship, this give and take. So So that really resonated with me. And finally, I just wanted to, for anyone interested in more on this, there's this incredible book called Grading Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, and you're nodding your head, so I'm sure you're familiar. But just some really incredible stories in here, primarily from Native traditions about the interaction with the landscape and the give and take and not taking too much. Things that I think Western culture in general is starting to go, wait, I think there's something to learn here. And, you know, ears are starting to perk up. Kenzie mentioned Winona LaDuke. Anyone not familiar, check her out on YouTube. She's got some incredible things to say about food security. So anyway, thank you, Melanie. Just a bunch of random thoughts that sprouted up for me as you were talking.
Thank you so much for sharing those. Yeah, I really appreciate it. And
I think we have time for about one more question before we break for lunch. Does anyone have another question?
I'd like to just offer a comment, Melanie. I know your presentation is not officially poetry, but as you listen to presentations at other types of conferences, the language and the feel and the metaphor and the of yours is so different. I mean, it doesn't have to be the Iliad and the Odyssey, but the sense of the earth, the sense of a seed is not just a seed. A seed is a part of a relationship. It's not a thing. And I don't know, if you look at your presentation as a kind of as a long narrative poem, you might see how different it is from a lot of other applied anthropology narratives that are sort of like the Night of the Living Dead, they're or the Day of the Living Dead. The words are alive. I mean, I realize this is about growing things and things, but it's things plus or things and beyond. It's value added seeds. How's that?
Thank you, Howard. That's really kind of you to say and really nice to hear. I think if it sounds alive, it's just because all of these plants and animals and land that I'm trying to talk about are alive. And so they're bringing something to it as well.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much, Melanie. Great presentation. Lots of interesting things to think about for sure. And since we're talking about food, I kind of sandwiched our two food presentations around lunch. So that way we would get hungry and then be satiated with lunch. And then we'd have more talk about food with Lucor's talk when we come back at 1:15. So we're going to take a break until 1:15 now. And then we will listen to Lucor Jordan's talk, Commensal Community, Mapping Meaning and Cementing Sociability Through Food. So go and get some food in your stomach so you're not hungry the whole time. See you at 1:15. And
Thanks,
of course,
Michael.
You can stick around and chat with one another. I'm going to go out and get some food myself. So